Hey everyone, today we're going to be trimming Mace. She, I think, is a 16-year-old quarter horse mare. Right here I'm picking the hoof out. This is where I get a good first look to check for any thrush and just kind of clean out that debris so I have a cleaner working area and don't dull my tools and make it more work for myself than it has to be. Got to get all the little gravels and dirt out of there. If I nip into a piece of gravel, it just chips the nippers and they're not cheap to replace. Here I am just popping those bars off again. She was overgrown and I'm able to just get my nippers in there. I don't do this on every hoof like I've said in other videos. I don't like to take a lot of sole and things out, but with how long she was, I'm able to, just to get that good base of a hoof back. I like to start nipping at one heel and working my way around to the toe and all the way back to the other heel. I don't do it every time. Some people will go from toe to heel, and this is just the way I prefer to do it. And horses need trimmed every 4 to 6 weeks. You could trim them every 8 weeks. By then you're starting to get some deformities. You can see how she's really long here on those toe quarters. I'm going to have to bring those back closer to the white line. And here I am, like I said before, she's so long, I'm able to clean out some of that sole. You can see I'm not totally pairing. You can see some of those little dirt lines there around the bar in the frog. And this is where I'm taking off that extra hoof wall. I do this from the bottom first just to make it easier when I go to the top and give myself a shape to start with. So I'm not totally guessing of how much I need to take off, even though you can pretty much tell by how the flares of the hoof are that how much you need to take off. You don't want to go too far in. You just want to get those flares off and make a nice rounded edge. And here I'm going at about that 45-degree angle all the way around the hoof, just so when she is moving around, she can land on that hoof and take off from any direction she wants. Because just like people, if you look at the bottom of shoes you've been wearing a long time, you tend to wear a part of the shoe off differently than you do other parts, and it's just how your natural gait and body movement is, and horses have the same exact thing. They'll usually wear off the inside toe, how they take off, and so that'll be shorter and have a little bit more of a roundness to it, but I don't want to leave anything of an edge, because if she's running around or doing whatever, and if she wants to turn a certain way and she has a sharp edge there that she's not necessarily used to, but that's just extra leverage on the joints that we don't need. Here's time for the hoof buffy. I know some of you guys really like that. I just take off with the hoof buffy the deeper rasp marks, because my rasp I use is the Cody James, and they're pretty aggressive rasps, but I like them because they don't get clogged up, they stay sharp, and I'm able just to refill the insert, and they cost just about the same as a normal rasp. But I like to use the hoof buffy just to clean it up and make it look pretty. Some people will hoof buffy the whole hoof wall. I do that when I am getting ready to put a shoe on, a glue-on shoe that is, because I need that nice clean surface for the glue to adhere to. If I glue it onto that outside hoof wall that's kind of dirty and muddy, even if I wire brush it or do whatever, it still will not attach the best. That you need a nice clean dry surface for that super glue, which is the type of shoe on that I use to glue on the shoes is a super glue. I use Easy Care Octos. I plan on doing a video with that later this year when I put some of those on. And here I cleaned up that frog just a little bit, get some of those wings off of there. If you don't clean it up, it'll just be extra area for the dirt to get stuck up in there. And then that's where thrush will likely decide to start, and you don't want thrush in a horse's hoof. Thrush is kind of a fungus that can lead to an infection, and if it's not treated, it can work up into the hoof. I've heard of horses getting infections, blood infections from the thrush working that far up. They can definitely get sore from it. They get super tender. There's been times that's why I like to use my hoof pick and clean out the hoof first. There's been times I've taken that hoof pick and just cleaning the hoof out, that whole frog has just been eaten away by thrush, and it'll start bleeding right away. And then obviously it's sore. It's just like if you cut your nails too short, they jerk away and they are not happy you did it. But it's good that we find it, so now that we're able to treat that hoof with whatever medication you decide, or topical treatments to treat it. I never used to wear gloves when trimming, except in the winter when it was cold. But this Cody James rasp is just so sharp that if I didn't wear gloves, you take your knuckles off pretty easy. I've taken off my one knuckle several times, just the skin of it, and it bleeds like heck. So I go through a pair of gloves at least once a month. And Mace here. We're going to start the top work. She stands really good. It's kind of a fun little thing I noticed. So these horses are at my house. The owner's husband unfortunately passed away, and she had to sell the farm because she couldn't afford it by herself. And so I told my wife about it, and she was like, just bring them here. We can keep them here until she figures out what she's going to do. So these horses are at our house, and I've trimmed them for years. But when they were previously at their old farm, or the horses that always been raising I trimmed them at, they always seemed to have a cracking problem on their hoof wall. They'd always get these cracks, didn't matter which horse. And I believe a lot of hoof cracks you could treat them with proper diet. A lot of people like to put oils and hoof top dressings, and I believe proper diet is what they need. But these horses just hung out in the pasture. They gave them their hay. I'm not sure if they grained them, but that's besides the point. And so when they came to my house, I was wondering how their hooves would turn out. And they are just on hay. I'm not sure if it was the ground or the terrain at their old house, because we both kind of have sandy grounds, but their hooves are almost non-existent cracking. They have a couple little cracks on the hoof wall, but not bad. But it was just interesting for me to see the difference of them just changing locations. Only about 20 miles difference, and the hooves totally changed, and they stayed on the same schedule. These ones got a little long because I had things going on. We went on vacation. They got out of my schedule somehow. And they were always on a schedule before, but now their hooves just look so much better. That was a little snippet where she tried to go to the bathroom on me. It does happen. Sometimes they're quick. Most of the time you can tell when that tail moves. It's time to get out of the way. But it does happen. I thought about bringing up that I've been asked before from people, why do we have to trim horses? Because in the wild, like the Mustangs out west, they don't have a farrier. You're not going to catch a wild Mustang and trim it every 4, 6, 8 weeks. And my answer to them is probably number one thing is the diet and the movement that the wild Mustangs do, and the terrain. You have diet, movement, terrain. They are on a very hard, abrasive terrain at all times. They don't have the nice, luscious pastures that we like to raise our animals in now. And then what goes with that terrain is how much they have to move. I forgot the exact numbers, but wild horses move miles and miles a day for forage and for water. And that's what gets me to the forage, is wild horses also do not have the nice, luscious green pastures with grain every day. They have to move to a lot of low-quality forage. We feed high-quality forage, we tend to, just because you don't want to buy junk hay to give your horses. But wild horses move miles and miles between water and forage. They have low-quality forage, so they have to move between all that, which adds more miles. And then also their diet, which is the forage. They don't have all the nice grains, the high in sugar grass that they're eating nice and low every day out in the pasture. So that's always my answer of why we have to trim domesticated horses all the time, or pet horses, you could say. And also, unfortunately, wild horses, it's survival of the fittest. If there's a horse with not very good feet at all, or really bad conformation, they may not make it. And that's just the way things are, whereas our pets, we can baby them along. We can get them orthopedic or fancy shoes, if you want to say, with pads, and we could make sure their feet are growing out better than when they started. This is the last hoof. This frog maybe had a little thrush there. You can kind of see it's a darker gunk in there, but it's not bad at all. Here I am nipping out the sole again. More of the bar there, but this sole really pops out nice. And I don't know if I've said it before, but dogs love eating horse hooves. They will be standing right under you, right next to you, waiting for that horse hoof. And they gobble it down. I don't let my dogs eat it. My dogs actually can't access our horses. We have an underground dog fence. But some dogs are just fine on it. Most, from what I understand, throw it up. It does not settle well at their stomachs. It's little sharp shards because they don't obviously chew it. It's kind of like them eating rawhide. People have problems with that with their dogs, and they'll throw it up. It stinks like high heavens. It's just a nasty things dogs do. Here I am rasping that hoof flat again. And rasping the hoof flat is probably one of the biggest parts of trimming, because if you can get a horse and you get it off on its heels to where it's higher on one side than the other, that is when you're going to start having problems, because they're going to land and then it's going to put extra leverage and forces where it doesn't need to be, instead of that whole hoof, capsule, and leg taking that load at one time. If they land hard on one side or the other, it's just like us. If you jar one side, it's not going to feel good. And I don't like to make the hoof completely flat. I will dish the quarters out a little bit, whereas I put those quarters a little bit not touching the ground. When you put the hoof on the ground, I almost want to stick a couple playing cards in there, and that's so the horse has room to load that hoof and not flare out and distort those quarters. If I left the whole hoof flat, when that horse lands and puts that weight and load bearing down, if it has nowhere to go, that's when you start getting your flares, because that hoof wants to go somewhere, so it has to push out. Whereas if you leave a little bit for the quarters to push down, then they're not pushing out.